No man had ever looked at her like that, not with pity, not with passing curiosity, but as if she were the answer to a prayer he'd whispered 1,000 nights into the dark. Joanna Hale didn't know what to do with such a look, so she turned away, as she always did, and busied herself with the jars on the shelf. But the stranger's quiet presence lingered, warmer than the fire crackling in the hearth, and something deep inside her trembled like a leaf in the wind. The wind outside the trading post was restless, whipping through the pines with a sound like a low, mournful song. Joanna tightened her shawl around her shoulders and wiped the counter for what must have been the 5th time that evening. There was little else to do. Winter was creeping closer, and fewer travelers dared the lonely trails that led to her outpost. She glanced at the lantern by the window, its golden glow pushing back the gathering shadows. Her father had lit it every evening without fail, a beacon for lost souls. Now she did the same, though most nights no one came. It was a habit, a small act of hope, one she wasn't ready to let go of, even if no one ever saw it. The fire on the hearth crackled, and she adjusted the logs, watching the sparks dance upward. The warmth was a comfort, but the silence was heavy. She was used to it, of course. Years of living alone had taught her how to bear the quiet. Still, some nights, the emptiness of the place pressed in on her like a weight. Then the door groaned open. A gust of cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. A man stepped inside, his broad frame filling the doorway. Water dripped from his hat and coat, splashing onto the worn floorboards. He was tall, taller than any man she'd ever seen, with shoulders that looked strong enough to carry the weight of the world. His dark eyes flickered to hers, steady and calm, like deep water undisturbed by wind. Joanna straightened, smoothing her apron out of habit. "Good evening," she said, her voice steady despite the sudden quickening of her pulse. "Can I help you?" The stranger removed his hat, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, his dark hair slightly damp from the rain. "Storm's coming," he said simply. His voice was deep but quiet, the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to be heard. "Looking for shelter." She nodded toward the hearth. "You're welcome to warm yourself. There's stew if you're hungry." He murmured his thanks and moved toward the fire, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Joanna watched him from the corner of her eye. Most travelers were either too talkative or too silent, filling the air with meaningless chatter or sitting in stiff, awkward quiet. This man was different. He didn't seem to mind the silence, but his presence filled the room all the same. She turned to the pot of stew hanging over the fire, ladling a generous portion into a chipped but sturdy bowl. The scent of herbs and slow-cooked meat filled the air, and her stomach tightened. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until now. When she handed him the bowl, their fingers brushed, just the slightest touch, and she nearly pulled back. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he looked at her, really looked at her, and said softly, "Thank you, ma'am." No one had ever thanked her like that, not as if she were just doing her duty, but as if her kindness mattered, as if she mattered. Joanna turned away quickly, busying herself with straightening the jars on the shelf. Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the shutters. The first fat snowflakes began to drift past the window, melting as soon as they touched the glass. The storm had arrived, and so had he. For the first time in years, the trading post didn't feel quite so empty. The storm raged outside, snow piling against the walls of the trading post like an uninvited guest pressing in. Joanna stoked the fire, adding another log. The flames leapt higher, casting flickering light across the room. She could feel the stranger's presence behind her, quiet and solid as an old oak. "You're welcome to stay the night," she said without turning. "The loft's got a cot. It's not much, but it's dry." "Obliged," came his low reply. She finally turned to face him. He had finished the stew and set the bowl aside, his rough hands clasped loosely between his knees. He wasn't just tall. His arms were thick with muscle, his shoulders broad enough to make the wooden chair beneath him seem small. But there was no arrogance in the way he held himself, no swagger like the cowhands who sometimes stopped by, full of loud talk and easy smiles. "What's your name?" she asked. Thaddeus Boone, he said. Most folks call me Thad. She nodded. Joanna Hale. A silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The wind howled outside, and the fire popped. Thad's gaze drifted to the small Bible on the shelf behind the counter, its leather cover worn from use. You read the good book? He asked. Every night, she admitted. A faint smile touched his lips. Same. She wasn't sure why that surprised her. Maybe because men like him, men who looked like they could wrestle a bear, usually didn't strike her as the praying kind. Thad shifted, his boots scraping against the floor. I can split wood come morning, he offered. Pay you back for the shelter. You don't have to. I'd like to. His voice was firm but kind. Joanna hesitated, then nodded. All right. Morning came, gray and cold. Joanna woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood. She pulled her shawl tight and stepped outside. Thad stood near the woodpile, his shirt sleeves rolled up despite the chill. Each swing of the axe was steady, powerful, the blade sinking deep into the logs with a clean thunk. Splits of firewood already lay stacked neatly beside him. He paused when he saw her, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. Morning. You've been busy, she said. Sun's barely up, he replied, as if that explained it. She watched him work a while longer, then turned to head back inside. I'll fix breakfast. By midday, the snow had stopped, but the air was still bitter. Thad had not only split enough wood to last her a week, but had also patched a loose shingle on the roof and fixed the wobbly front step. Joanna handed him a cup of coffee as he stepped inside. You didn't have to do all that. He took the cup, his fingers brushing hers. Felt good to be useful. She studied him over the rim of her own cup. You always this handy. He shrugged. Been on my own a long time. Something in his tone made her wonder where he'd come from, what roads he'd traveled that led him here. But she didn't ask. Some questions were too heavy for a snowy afternoon. Instead, she reached for the Bible on the shelf. Pa always read a verse after meals. Thad nodded, as if that were the most natural thing in the world. She opened it, her fingers tracing the worn pages. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Thad's deep voice joined hers on the next line. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Their voices mingled in the quiet room, and for the first time in a long time, Joanna didn't feel so alone. A week passed, and the snow kept falling. Thad stayed, helping with chores, tending the livestock, and sharing meals in silence that no longer felt empty. Joanna found herself watching him when he wasn't looking. The way his hands, rough and scarred, handled the animals with surprising gentleness. The way he bowed his head in prayer before every meal. The way he looked at her when he thought she wouldn't notice. Then, one evening, as they sat by the fire, Thad spoke. I've been praying for a woman like you. Joanna's knitting needles stilled. What? He didn't look away. Not just any woman. Someone strong. Someone who knows what it means to work hard, to trust God even when life ain't easy. His voice was steady, sure. I believe he led me here. To you. Her heart pounded. No man had ever spoken to her like this. Not with pretty words meant to flatter, but with quiet certainty, as if he were stating a simple truth. You don't know me, she whispered. I know enough. The fire crackled between them. Joanna's hands trembled. She thought of all the years she'd spent alone, all the time she'd told herself she was content. But now, hearing those words, she realized how hungry her heart had been. Thad leaned forward, his eyes earnest. I ain't asking for an answer now. Just think on it. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. That night, as she lay in bed, she replayed his words in her mind. You are the one I've been praying for. Outside, the wind howled, but for the first time in a long time, Joanna didn't feel the cold. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the Montana territory in a thick white silence that stretched for miles. Joanna stood at the window, watching as Thad broke the ice on the water trough, his breath puffing in the cold air like smoke from a chimney. He moved with purpose, his large frame making quick work of the morning chores. She turned back to the stove, stirring the bubbling oatmeal. The trading post felt different with him here, warmer, somehow, despite the freezing temperatures outside. The creak of the door announced his return, bringing with him a gust of frosty air. "Animals are fed," he said, stomping snow from his boots. "Wind's picking up again. More snow coming." Joanna nodded, pouring him a cup of coffee. "We're stocked well enough. Unless this storm lasts another month, we'll be fine." Thad took the cup, his fingers brushing hers. A simple touch, but it sent a strange warmth through her. "You ever get lonely out here?" he asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. She busied herself with the oatmeal. "I'm used to it." He studied her over the rim of his cup. Being used to something ain't the same as not feeling it. Joanna paused, the wooden spoon hovering over the pot. No one had ever acknowledged that before, that just because she could endure solitude didn't mean she didn't feel its weight. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, the fire crackling beside them. When they finished, Thad reached for the Bible on the shelf without being asked. He flipped through the pages, his rough fingers surprisingly gentle on the thin paper. "Psalm 34, he said. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Joanna's hands stilled in her lap. Had he chosen that verse on purpose? Did he somehow sense the loneliness she tried so hard to ignore? As the days passed, they settled into a rhythm. Thad took care of the heavy work, chopping wood, repairing fences, hunting when supplies ran low. Joanna tended the store, cooked their meals, and mended clothes by firelight. In the evenings, they took turns reading scripture, their voices blending in the quiet cabin. One particularly cold night, as a blizzard raged outside, Joanna found herself staring at Thad across the hearth. The firelight danced across his strong features, softening the hard lines of his face. "Why were you on the road in winter?" she asked suddenly. Thad looked up from whittling a piece of wood. "Been drifting too long. Felt like it was time to stop." "But why here?" He held her gaze. Had a feeling. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. Joanna pulled her shawl tighter. "Winters are long here," she said softly. Thad's knife stilled. "I'm not afraid of long winters." Something in his voice made her breath catch. It wasn't just about the season, it was a promise. That he would stay. That he could wait. The storm broke after 3 weeks, leaving behind a world glittering with ice. Joanna was sweeping the porch when she spotted a rider approaching through the melting snow. "Visitor," she called to Thad, who was repairing the barn door. The mail carrier, a wiry man named Pete, reined in his horse. "Got a letter for you, Miss Hale," he said, handing her an envelope. Then his eyes flicked to Thad, and his expression changed. "Boone," he said curtly. Thad nodded in greeting. "Pete." The mail carrier's mouth tightened. He turned back to Joanna. "You might want to be careful who you take in, ma'am. Not all men are what they seem." Before she could respond, he spurred his horse and rode off, leaving behind a heavy silence. Joanna looked at the letter in her hands, then at Thad. His jaw was set, his shoulders tense. "What was that about?" she asked. Thad exhaled slowly. "Best we talk inside." The trading post suddenly felt too small. Joanna lit a lamp against the gray afternoon light as Thad paced near the fireplace. "My family ain't exactly respectable," he began. "My brothers ran with an outlaw gang, robbed stagecoaches, stole cattle." He met her eyes. "I rode with them when I was young and stupid." Joanna's fingers tightened around the letter. "You were an outlaw." "Was," he stressed. "Got out after things turned bloody. Found God in a jail cell." He ran a hand through his hair. "Paid my debt to society and been walking the straight path ever since." She stared at him, trying to reconcile the gentle, God-fearing man she'd come to know with the image of a hardened criminal. The unopened letter in her hands suddenly felt heavy. She broke the seal and read silently. "Miss Hale, word has reached town that you're harboring a Boone. That family is nothing but trouble. His brothers are wanted men, and blood runs thick. Don't be fooled by his act of respectability. You're a decent woman. Don't throw your lot in with his kind." The note wasn't signed. Joanna looked up to find Thad watching her, his expression resigned. as if he already knew what the letter said. "Is it true?" she asked. "Would your family come here? Bring trouble?" Thad's voice was quiet. "I can't promise they won't try, but I can promise I ain't that man anymore." Joanna folded the letter carefully, her mind racing. She thought of all the quiet moments they'd shared, the prayers, the chores, the way he'd looked at her when he said she was the one he'd prayed for. But now doubt crept in, cold as the wind outside. Had God really brought Thad to her? Or was this just another heartbreak waiting to happen? She turned away, needing space to think. "I need time," she said softly. Thad nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I understand." That night, Joanna lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The trading post had never felt so empty, even with Thad just upstairs. She thought about the lantern she lit every evening, how long she'd waited for someone to see its light. Now she wondered, had she been too quick to trust the first man who did? 3 days passed in stiff silence. Joanna moved through her chores like a ghost, avoiding Thad's eyes whenever their paths crossed. He gave her space, speaking only when necessary, his usual quiet presence now feeling like a weight in the room. On fourth morning, as Joanna kneaded bread dough with more force than needed, Thad cleared his throat from the doorway. "Joanna," he said gently, "we need to talk." Her hands stilled in the flowery mound. She didn't look up. "About what?" "About me. About my past." He stepped closer, his work-worn hands hanging empty at his sides. "I won't have you hearing it from others and wondering." She wiped her hands on her apron and finally met his gaze. The pain in his dark eyes surprised her. Thad pulled out a chair at the rough wooden table. "Will you sit?" The dough could wait. Joanna sat. He took the chair across from her, turning his hat in his hands. "I was 17 when I rode with my brothers the first time," he began. "Thought I was proving myself. By 20, I could outshoot most men in the territory." His voice grew quieter. "By 22, I'd killed a man." Joanna's breath caught. "It was a cattle dispute turned ugly," Thad continued, his knuckles whitening on the brim of his hat. "Afterward, I rode off alone, sick to my stomach. Got drunk for 3 days straight. When the posse caught up, I didn't even resist." The morning sunlight through the window seemed too bright for such a dark story. Joanna watched the dust mote float between them. "Spent 2 years in a Texas prison," he said. "That's where I found this." He tapped a small Bible peeking from his shirt pocket. "A dying cellmate gave it to me. Said it held the only truth that mattered." Joanna remembered the well-worn pages of that same Bible she'd seen him read every evening. "I'm not making excuses," Thad said firmly. "The things I did, they'll always be part of me. But prison broke me clean, and God put me back together different." He met her eyes. "I can't change my name or my blood, but I swear to you, the man sitting here today serves the Lord, not the Boone legacy." Joanna studied his face, the earnest set of his jaw, the quiet sorrow in his eyes. This wasn't the face of a man trying to deceive her. "What made you leave your brothers for good?" she asked softly. Thad exhaled slowly. "They ambushed a stagecoach carrying women and children. I rode ahead to warn the driver." His voice dropped to a whisper. "My oldest brother shot me in the back for it." Joanna's hand flew to her mouth. He tugged at his collar, revealing a jagged scar above his left shoulder blade. "Bullet still in there. Doctor said digging it out would kill me." A humorless smile touched his lips. "Guess you could say I carry my past with me, inside and out." The clock on the mantel ticked loudly in the stillness. Joanna traced a knot on the wooden table with her finger. "People don't forget," she said at last. "The letter. People see what they expect to see." Thad interrupted gently. "A big man with a rough past must be dangerous. A woman alone must be lonely." He leaned forward. "But God sees the heart, and he led me here to you." Joanna stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She needed air, needed space to think. Without a word, she grabbed her shawl and stepped outside. The cold hit her like a slap. She walked blindly toward the barn, her breath coming in white puffs. Inside, the familiar smells of hay and animals wrapped around her. She sank onto a bale of hay, pressing her palms to her eyes. Was Thad's transformation real? Could a man truly change so completely? And if he had, did she have the courage to trust him? A rustling sound made her look up. Thad stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright winter light. He didn't speak, just waited. Joanna took a shaky breath. "Do you still have nightmares?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Sometimes." "About what?" "About the man I was," he said simply. Something in his answer undid her. A man haunted by his past sins wasn't a man who gloried in them. She thought of the gentle way he handled her livestock, the reverence with which he read scripture, the patience he'd shown her these past weeks. Slowly, she rose from the hay bale. "I believe you," she said, "about your change, about your faith." Relief washed over Thad's face. He took a step forward, then stopped himself. But I need to know one thing." She met his gaze squarely. "If your brothers come, whose side will you be on?" Thad didn't hesitate. "God's side, and yours." The simple certainty in his voice kindled a warmth in Joanna's chest. She nodded, suddenly unable to speak around the lump in her throat. Thad turned to leave, giving her space again. At the barn door he paused. "Joanna, the man who wrote that letter, he wasn't wrong to warn you, but he wasn't right about everything." She watched him walk back to the house, his broad shoulders squared against the cold, and realized something startling. She wanted to believe in Thad Boone. That evening, Joanna sat by the fire, mending a tear in one of Thad's shirts. The needle moved in and out of the fabric in steady rhythm as she replayed their conversation from earlier. Thad sat across from her, carefully oiling his saddle. The comfortable silence between them had returned, but something had shifted. Joanna found herself watching the way the firelight played across his hands, noticing how carefully he worked the leather. "Thad," she said suddenly, "there's something I need to tell you too." He set aside the saddle and gave her his full attention. Joanna put down her mending and went to the small trunk by her bed. From beneath a stack of linens, she pulled out a yellowed envelope. Her hands trembled slightly as she returned to her chair. "5 years ago," she began, "a man named Daniel courted me. He was a trapper passing through, handsome and full of pretty words." She smoothed the unopened envelope on her lap. "After 3 months, he proposed. Said he'd be back in a week with a preacher." Thad's expression remained neutral, but his hands tightened on his knees. Joanna swallowed hard. "He never came back. Later, I heard he'd married a banker's daughter in Helena." She held up the envelope. "I wrote this letter to him, full of anger and hurt and shame, but I never sent it." She offered it to Thad. After a moment's hesitation, he took it and carefully unfolded the single sheet inside. His eyes moved over the words, and Joanna watched as his jaw tightened. When he finished, he refolded the letter with great care. "This Daniel," he said quietly. "He was a fool." Joanna blinked. That wasn't the response she'd expected. Thad leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Not just for leaving, for making you doubt your worth." He tapped the letter against his palm. "A man who could walk away from you doesn't deserve a single one of these words." Tears pricked Joanna's eyes. She'd carried that letter like a stone in her heart for years, and with a few sentences, Thad had lifted its weight. He stood suddenly and walked to the fireplace. Before Joanna could react, he tossed the letter into the flames. "Thad," he turned to face her as the paper curled and blackened behind him. "You're not that woman anymore," he said firmly. "The one who waited for a man who didn't deserve her. The one who questioned her value." He took a step closer. "You're Joanna Hale, daughter of the king, keeper of this land, and if God wills it." His voice softened. "The woman I hope to call my wife." Joanna's breath caught. The fire crackled, consuming the last of her old heartache. In its place, something new and fragile began to grow. She rose slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "That's quite a speech, Mr. Boone." A slow smile spread across Thad's face. Took me 3 weeks to work up the nerve. Joanna found herself smiling back. For the first time in years, the future stretched before her, not as a lonely road, but as a path they might walk together. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, the fire burned warm and bright. The morning dawned crisp and clear, sunlight sparkling on the fresh snow like scattered diamonds. Joanna stood at the kitchen window, watching Thad carry an armload of firewood from the shed, his breath making little clouds in the cold air. Something had changed between them last night. The air now hummed with quiet understanding, with possibility. She was pouring coffee when the door opened, bringing with it a burst of cold air and the scent of pine that always seemed to cling to Thad. Got enough wood to last through the next storm, he announced, stomping snow from his boots. Joanna handed him a steaming mug. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. His fingers brushed hers as he took the cup, sending an unexpected warmth through her. Been thinking. About what? She turned back to the stove to hide the flush creeping up her neck. About how to ask you something important. His voice had that quiet, steady tone that made her heart beat faster. The skillet in Joanna's hand clattered against the stove. She took a steadying breath before turning to face him. What would that be? Thad set his coffee down and reached into his pocket. When he opened his hand, a simple silver band lay across his palm. My grandmother's, he said softly. Only decent thing my family ever gave me. Joanna's hands flew to her mouth. The ring gleamed in the morning light, its surface worn smooth from years of wear. I ain't got much to offer, Thad continued, his deep voice rougher than usual. Just my name, for what that's worth, and my promise to love you faithful before God. But if you'll have me, Joanna Hale, I'd be honored to call you my wife. Tears blurred Joanna's vision as she stared at the ring. This wasn't some flowery proposal from a smooth-talking stranger. This was real, a working man's honest offer of his life and love. May I, she whispered, reaching for the ring. Thad's breath caught as she picked it up, turning it in the sunlight. It fit perfectly on her finger, as if it had been waiting for her all these years. Yes, she said simply, looking up to meet his eyes. Yes, I'll marry you. The smile that broke across Thad's face could have melted every snowbank in Montana. He reached for her hands, his calloused fingers warm around hers. We'll do this proper, he promised. Wait till spring if you want. Build us a proper house first if dash. Joanna shook her head, surprising herself. No waiting. The preacher comes through next week for Sunday service. She squeezed his hands. Unless you want to wait. Thad's answer was to pull her gently into his arms. When his lips met hers, Joanna learned what love felt like, not the dizzy rush of infatuation, but the steady warmth of coming home. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a happy blur. Joanna found herself humming as she worked, the silver band gleaming on her finger as she stocked shelves and balanced ledgers. Thad seemed to walk taller, his usual quiet presence now radiating a quiet joy. On the morning of the preacher's expected visit, Joanna stood before her small mirror, pinning up her hair with hands that trembled slightly. Today she would become Joanna Boone. The thought sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. A knock at the door made her jump. Joanna. Thad's voice was tense. We got company. She hurried to the window. 4 riders approached the trading post, their horses kicking up snow. The lead riders had shaded his face, but something in his posture set Joanna's nerves on edge. Thad stood on the porch, his stance relaxed but ready. Joanna joined him, her hand finding his arm. Your brothers. He nodded once, his jaw tight. Ethan's in front. Others are likely cousins or old gang members. The riders reined in before the porch. The lead man pushed back his hat, revealing a face that resembled Thad's, but harder, colder. Little brother, he drawled. Heard you was settling down. Had to see for myself. Joanna felt Thad's muscles tense beneath her hand. Ethan, he acknowledged. You're a long way from Texas. Ethan's gaze slid to Joanna, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. This the woman? Heard she's got a nice little spread here. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Always said you was the smart one, Thaddeus. The other riders chuckled. their hands resting too casually near their guns. Joanna's pulse hammered in her throat, but she lifted her chin. If you've come to trade, we're open. Otherwise, you're welcome to water your horses and move on. Ethan's eyebrows rose. Feisty. He turned back to Thad. We're putting the old gang back together. Need your gun. Thad didn't move. I'm done with that life. Like hell you are. Ethan's voice hardened. Blood's blood, brother. You don't walk away from that. Joanna felt the moment shift, the air growing heavy with threat. Thad stepped forward, putting himself between her and the riders. I said no. Ethan's hand twitched toward his pistol. Then we'll take what we want and burn the rest. Time seemed to slow. Joanna saw Thad's shoulders square, noticed the way his right hand hovered near his own gun, not drawing, but ready. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but carried steel beneath it. You'll do none of that. There's a new sheriff in Deer Lodge. He's got 20 men and a telegraph wire straight to the governor. You really want to start a war you can't win. Ethan hesitated, his eyes darting to his companions. The standoff stretched, brittle as ice on a pond. Finally, Ethan spat in the snow. You always was a disappointment. He yanked his horse's head around. This ain't over, little brother. As the riders disappeared in a cloud of snow, Joanna realized she'd been holding her breath. Thad's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. You stood with me, he murmured into her hair. Joanna turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had faced down his past for her. Always, she promised. In the distance, another rider appeared, the preacher, his black coat stark against the white landscape. Thad's arms tightened around her. Still want to marry an outlaw's brother? Joanna touched his face, her fingers tracing the strong jaw, the lines of care and hard living. I want to marry the man God saved for me, she said firmly, the one who stood his ground today. Thad's smile returned, warm as the sun breaking through winter clouds. Together, they walked out to meet the preacher, ready to begin their new life. The morning of their wedding dawned bright and clear, the sky a brilliant blue after weeks of gray winter. Joanna stood before the small mirror in her bedroom, smoothing the simple ivory dress she had sewn years ago, back when she had still dreamed of a day like this. The fabric was worn but clean, the lace at the collar yellowed with age but still delicate. She had never imagined she would actually wear it. A soft knock at the door made her turn. Come in. Her friend Martha, the preacher's wife, stepped inside, her eyes shining. Oh, Joanna. She pressed a hand to her chest. You look beautiful. Joanna's fingers fluttered to the silver ring on her left hand, the one Thad had given her, his grandmother's. I never thought this day would come, she admitted softly. Martha smiled, stepping forward to adjust a loose curl. God's timing is perfect, even when we don't understand it. Outside, the sound of horses and voices drifted through the window. Half the town had come, despite the cold, to witness the unlikely union of the quiet trading post woman and the reformed outlaw. Joanna took a deep breath, her stomach fluttering. Are you ready? Martha asked. Joanna nodded. More than ready. The ceremony took place in front of the trading post, beneath the wide Montana sky. Benches had been brought out, and townsfolk bundled in coats and scarves filled them, their breath puffing in the cold air. A simple arch of pine boughs marked where she and Thad would stand. When the preacher signaled, Joanna stepped out onto the porch. A hush fell over the crowd as she walked forward, snow crunching under her boots. And then she saw him, Thad, standing tall and solemn beside the preacher, dressed in his best shirt and a borrowed coat. His dark eyes locked onto hers, and the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. She reached his side, and he took her hands in his grip warm and steady. The preacher began, his voice carrying over the gathered crowd. We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. Joanna barely heard the words. All she could focus on was Thad's face, the way his thumb brushed over her knuckles, the quiet certainty in his eyes. When it came time for vows, he spoke first, his deep voice steady. Joanna Hale, he said. You are the answer to prayers I prayed when I didn't even have words. You saw the man I was trying to be, not just the one I had been. He squeezed her hands. I vow to love you, protect you, and stand beside you all my days. Before God and these witnesses, I am yours. Tears burned in Joanna's eyes as she spoke her own vows. Thaddeus Boone, you walked into my life when I had given up hope. You spoke words to my heart that no one else ever had. She swallowed past a lump in her throat. I vow to stand with you, to trust you, and to love you faithfully. Before God and these witnesses, I am yours. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Thad leaned down, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that sealed their promises. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Joanna barely heard them. All she knew was the warmth of Thad's hand in hers and the overwhelming sense that, after all the years of waiting, she was finally home. The wedding feast was simple: hot cider, fresh bread, and venison stew shared among friends. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the snow, Thad stood and raised his cup. I have something to say, he announced, his voice carrying over the chatter. The crowd quieted, turning to him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is a letter Joanna wrote me, he said, his voice softer now. And with her permission, I'd like to read it. Joanna's cheeks warmed, but she nodded. She had given it to him that morning. Her heart poured out onto the page. Thad unfolded the paper and began to read. My dearest Thad, no man had ever spoken to me the way you did, not with empty flattery, not with lies wrapped in pretty words, but with truth so deep it shook me. You looked at me, really looked at me, and saw something worth loving. You called me the answer to your prayers, but the truth is, you were the answer to mine. I had given up on love, given up on ever being chosen. But then you came, with your quiet strength and your steadfast heart, and you showed me what real love looks like. Not the fleeting kind, but the kind that stays, the kind that builds a life. You are the one God sent, and I will spend every day of my life thanking him for you. Yours always, Joanna. Silence followed as Thad lowered the letter. His eyes glistened as he looked at her. Then, without a word, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her again, to the delight of their guests. As the celebration continued around them, Joanna leaned into Thad's side, his arm wrapped securely around her. The lantern in the window burned bright, no longer just a symbol of hope, but a beacon of the love they had found. And for the first time in her life, Joanna knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story of faith, redemption, and love that comes softly, please like and subscribe for more heartfelt historical romances. Let us know in the comments, what was your favorite moment between Thad and Joanna? And remember, God's timing is perfect. Never give up hope. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Psalm 37 verse 4.